Within the last few decades, Asia has been the hotspot of growth for the aviation industry globally, and a part of this has been some airlines becoming some of the greatest success stories in business in the region. However, like many business ventures, not everything always pans out, as for every success there are some other failures that fade away from the headlines and our thoughts. One such example of this is a short-lived airline, Rayani Air, a Malaysian-based airline that operated in the mid-2010s with an emphasis of following Muslim standards. The story of Rayani Air begins with its two founders, the couple of Ravi Algendran and his wife Katharinyani Govindran, who saw an opportunity to serve the majority Muslim population of Malaysia with an airline that would adhere to Muslim or Sharia standards. Regarding the strategy and branding, Algendran was once quoted on the Malay Mail, stating, quote, "This is not a matter of segregation. We have a target market and anyone wishing to travel in a modest and alcohol-free environment will feel at home." He added that with the Sharia compliance of the airline and the industry, that, quote, "We are confident that we will fill this niche and be able to compete with established airlines." With that plan in mind, Algendran and Govindan founded the airline in 2015, getting the license for operations from Malaysian aviation authorities, and the initial base of the airline was on the island of Langkawi on the northwestern part of the country. For its initial fleet and flights, the airline would acquire two Boeing 737-400s, which had previously been used by some other airlines, and by December 2015, the first flights were launched from Langkawi to Kuala Lumpur. Now, going back to the Sharia compliance of the airline, these are just some of the standards that passengers would immediately notice on the flights, which includes halal menus, meaning that there is no pork or alcoholic beverages served, and a prayer call is observed before the flight took off. Flight attendants who were practicing Muslims were required to wear a hijab, while those who were not would be required to be dressed appropriately in compliance with Sharia standards. Following its initial flight, the airline began planning its own future plans, which included the operations expanding to other cities in Malaysia, including Kota Kinabalu and Kuching, before opening international flights to Indonesia and the Philippines. Beyond the initial phase of operation, the airline also planned to operate Umrah and Hajj pilgrimage flights to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. As things turned out, things did not go according to plan, and soon the Rayani Air was faced with questions and criticisms regarding its operations. No one further was affected than the passengers themselves, who began to experience some flight cancellations, some without warning, and to draw further ire, some passengers were complaining that no replacement flights were offered. To add further problems, Rayani Air got more negative press and scrutiny from the country's transportation ministry when a Malaysian MP who happened to be on a Rayani Air flight from Kuala Lumpur to Kuching posted a photo of his boarding pass, which was reportedly handwritten, raising security concerns around the airline. Things further escalated when 416 employees of the airline accused and threatened to sue the airline management over unpaid salaries and benefits in April of 2016. Rather than going forward with its lawsuit, the airline employees instead then led to a strike mounted by the airline's pilots, which grounded all of the airline's operations. This didn't really sit well with a lot of the customers, many of whom have already seen and experienced some delays of many hours, some as long as 13 hours, and cancellations with no resolution in sight. With mounting problems, this led to an inquiry by the Malaysian Aviation Commission, which later revoked the airline operating license of Rayani Air by June of 2016. Even with flights not operating since April of 2016, the airline was found to be liable for refunding passengers. As I was reading the story of Rayani Air, I remind myself that the aviation industry is a brutal business, and this is even more true to many new fledgling airlines where the first passengers can make or break the airline in terms of their reputation. With high-profile mistakes making it onto the news reports, I couldn't help to say to myself that it was likely cash flow and financial problems early on that doomed the airline, something that's very common in business, and it was clearly evident with the unhappy employees who were not receiving their pay and benefits. Adding to not taking care of stranded travelers affected by delays and cancellations, Rayani Air seemingly failed in the essential part of the business, which is taking care of the customers. Aside from not taking care of the essential part of running an airline, another factor to look into was a Sharia-compliant airline really needed in the market of Malaysia? Throughout the world, there are some examples of airlines that adhere to Sharia law, such as Saudia and Iran Air, who do operate successfully so far. These airlines also just so happen to also serve passengers who are not necessarily practicing Muslims themselves. As for Malaysia and the rest of Southeast Asia, there is a case that on paper, there is a strong population of practicing Muslims, and there are some services, especially the Hajj and Umrah pilgrimage flights operated by Malaysia Airlines' own subsidiary. However, a small startup airline like Rayani Air was competing with larger and well-funded airlines like Malaysia Airlines and Air Asia, who not only catered to Muslims but also the overall population of Malaysia and the rest of Southeast Asia and travelers from other parts of the world. To serve their Muslim populations, the airlines such as Air Asia and Malaysia Airlines do make accommodations, with the example of being Malaysia Airlines, whose in-flight menu adheres to halal standards. There are also other destinations in Asia such as Indonesia and the Philippines with large Muslim populations, though the argument could be made that travelers traveling between those markets could be best served with other airlines. The last point I want to make is regarding the aircraft being used, the Boeing 737-400s, which were aged around over 20 years. An age where most airlines would retire those aircraft in favor of the next generation 737s or the Airbus A320 family of aircraft. While it may have been a much less costly option to acquire these aircraft, it could have also eventually added more to the operating costs to keep the 737-400s in operational condition. Since Rayani Air ceased operations in 2016, you'd assume that the story would end there. That actually would not be the case, as earlier this year, it has been reported that the airline is looking to make a comeback after a social media post by Rayani Air founder Ravi Algendran. However, the Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia has reported it has not received an application for the airline operator certificate from the airline. Should a new application be submitted by Rayani Air, there will be likely some scrutiny given the history of the airline and the revocation of the airline operating certificate in 2016. Regarding this issue, the Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia has stated on reports such as on the Malay Mail, saying, quote, "It's not an issue of being strict or not for CAAM to filter a defunct airline. This involves a public safety, and the operator is required to meet standards set by CAAM and the International Civil Aviation Organization. Each application will be evaluated to meet the standards and regulations. Therefore, it all depends on the readiness." The now defunct Rayani Air was one of several airlines that have, over the course of the many years of Asian aviation, has come and gone. But what really got my attention to this airline, and the reason why I did this, was because of a recent comment on a previous video. This has given me the idea of featuring airlines that are no longer operating but once served the skies over Asia. So if you have any suggestions as to what airline I should profile next, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. In the meantime, if you like this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you again for watching, and have a great day.